Well, thanks everybody. So yeah, we're going to talk about failure modes and effects analysis today, FMEA. And if it's not something that you're familiar with, well, that's why we're here. And so let me kind of put this in orientation with if you've been on any of my webinars before, you know I often start with this particular slide. And this slide sort of puts it all into perspective as to, what is organizational learning and how does it fit together with things like human and organizational performance. How does root cause analysis and learning teams, how do they fit with failure modes effects analysis and risk assessments? And then how does the process and the tools, the software and whatever else sort of all fit together? So starting up here with the learning opportunity. In FMEA, we're looking ahead. We're looking into the future. Okay, so this is an exercise in imagining how a thing, and I'm going to mostly focus on things. Although, if you're not from the thing universe, if you're more process related, if maybe you're in healthcare, or maybe you're in customer service or IT service management or something like that. Just think about when I say thing, just think about process because this works well with processes as well. But in any case, whatever it is, we're thinking about how it might fail in the future. And so this is a proactive exercise. Okay. Now, you still need ideas and information from a diverse source of people, and you still need a process to follow. And you need a facilitator who understands that process and knows when to dial it back and when to dial it up. We need a means of learning on a local level. In other words, local in this case means we're going to learn about a particular thing or process, but then we're going to share or expand those learnings to a global. We're going to identify, if we can, global opportunities for improvement, global opportunities for learning. And then, like with everything, there's some kind of a reporting storage feature where we're able to save what we've learned, report out what we've learned. And Katie's helping me out today because she wants to learn how to do FMEA. And right now, it's me and Sarah. We're the only ones that are current at Sologic that are doing FMEA. And we've got a ton of them on our books for this year. And I need some help. And so Katie's going to jump in. So I don't know, Katie, do you want to introduce yourself? I'm just assuming everybody knows who you are.
Good morning, everyone. Like Michelle said, I'm an instructor for Sologic. So far I've been focusing on root cause analysis classes, but yeah, I look forward to learning our FMEA process and leading those projects in the future.
Yeah, it's fun. And most of the time, we do some training. So if you're interested in FMEA training, we have a really fun training class. We don't do it very often. And I don't know what the reason is. Probably because we're generally associated as being the root cause analysis people. And so the bulk of people come looking for us when they need RCA stuff. I have done the FMEA class before with a group of engineers, and it was so fun. And I ended up going to Target and buying a bunch of like kitchen appliances, and we took them all apart in the class. It was
Mhm.
very hands-on. It was great. I feel a little bad because we definitely destroyed. It was a learning that led to destruction and maybe a little too much trash, but so in any case, if you're interested in training, we'll definitely do it. And then also, if you're interested in consulting services, well, that's pretty much what we've been doing. And we also have an FMEA component for CauseLink. Yeah. And the reason why this makes sense for us as a business is because it's kind of like root cause analysis looking forward, not what did fail, but how could something fail. And as with everything that we're doing, when you're facilitating one of these, you got to focus on the learning, not necessarily the process. And so, what does that mean? That means that as a facilitator, imagine yourself like I was last week. All 5 days of last week, I was leading a team of about 25 people from all over the world. I had people from Europe, people from Asia, people from the United States, and a few people that were dialing in. And we were learning about a backup generator system. Okay. I need my process. Okay, I really do. I need to be able to know what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, what step of the process we're in. That said, I don't want to burden them with holding them to the process. Wait a minute, everybody. We're still working on this cell of the spreadsheet. that just is no fun. And then it leads to comments kind of like what I heard internally yesterday that I won't repeat who said it, but they basically said, I hate FMEA. I hate it. It's like pulling teeth. I would rather have a root canal than do an FMEA. Oh, that, well, no, I mean, that's not just not been my experience. Mostly because I like to learn, and we're going to put the learning first. So let me kind of get your head in a space, and then I'm going to stop after a couple of slides, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion about where we're at, make sure that we're in the right place. So this also is something that I use a lot. I find it universally applicable to sort of set us into the right mind frame, to basically accept this subject matter. So let's imagine that we're here, okay, but we want to get over there. We plan a pathway to get there, but in reality, we're meandering towards where we want to go. And that has everything to do with uncertainty and the fact that the future, which is where that goal exists, is not the present. And what's different between the future and the present is uncertainty. And so, even though we might plan a very straight and narrow path, walking that path invariably involves the need to make adjustments and course corrections. All right. Well, so it didn't go exactly as planned, but we still got there. That's normally how it happens. But sometimes we go dramatically off key or off path, and by dramatically meaning we cross some lower threshold for what we consider to be acceptable. Well, then we consider that. That's usually how we define a problem and whether or not that problem, how we respond to it. And this is normally where the root cause analysis kicks in. All right, so in the world of reliability, we're dealing with things. And in this case, we're going to look at a sorter. And this is this is like an Amazon fulfillment center. So it's sorting product to be put into boxes and shipped to y'all. How do you like my y'all, Katie? That was my southern. I'm working on it. I want it to be natural.
It sounded very authentic.
So that's how it gets to y'all. And so we usually with reliability problems, we look at the asset down. We want to know why the asset was down, but then we also want to understand why it took as long as it took to recover. And that leaves us with a pattern that looks like this. All right, I want to tell the story of the failure, and that's going to happen on this branch. And then I'm going to tell the story of the recovery, and that's going to happen on this branch. Okay, but in the world of FMEA, what we're doing here is, well, we're answering the question, could we have foreseen this failure? How did this catch us by surprise? And then, could we have been better prepared to recover from this failure after it happened? Right? So this is, a lot of times the questions that come up in an RCA. So FMEA, it takes away from basically looking forward in time. What might make the sorter become available? All right, so what could cause it? And how can we maintain the asset or design the asset or improve the asset to minimize the chance of failures? And also, what might prevent us from recovering or extend our recovery time? And that's going to answer the question, what spare parts might we need? What tools might we need? What technical expertise might we need so that we can quickly recover in the event of a failure? All right. And I see I'm watching the chat come in. I see a chat from Albert Condeo. I hope I said that right. It could be Condelo. It could be Condeo. I'm not sure which, but he says hello, and I'm gonna say hello back to you. Good to see you, bud. Okay, so that's the essence of FMEA. And I have so let me stop for a second. I'm gonna ask Katie, what do you think so far? Are we okay at where we stand?
Yes, we did have another question come in through a different channel that somebody asked, how do we define a failure? And I responded with, a failure is anything that negatively impacts your organization. Would you like to add or modify that, Brian?
Yeah, to a certain degree, right? So negatively impacts, the things are negatively impacting us all the time, but a lot of it we don't care about. It's like that was a pain in the ass, but I still did it, and it wasn't enough, So it's got to hurt you enough to make you care about it, and that's kind of how we define that. Now, that's a totally separate topic around threshold criteria, goals and objectives, and I would be more than happy to have a side conversation about that at a different time. So let us know if you want to talk about setting threshold criteria, how we go about that, which is a formal definition of a problem. So, I'm going to walk you through this, recognizing that it's like, wait a minute, what the hell is going on here? Well, what this is a variation of a potential failure curve, or a PF curve. And what we've got here in these different colors are the different phases of existence of an asset, okay, and the asset's ability to operate. At first, you're in a design phase. Well, that's when it's not doing anything at day zero. You got it, it's still on paper. But over time, you build your functional, you build your prototypes, and you learn and all of that sort of thing. And at a certain point, you're like, yeah, I'm ready to put it into active service. All right, well, at that point that it's in service, most of the time it is achieving or capable of achieving more than the minimum acceptable performance level, right? But that gap is very, very important, because the whole purpose of FMEA is to maintain that gap over the life of the asset, and to extend the period of that of its useful life as long as you possibly can.
And
And
Brian, I'm
yeah,
going to ask a question. What
yeah.
is the difference between failure mode and failure mechanism? For example, if bolt gets broken, then what will be failure mode and mechanism?
Okay, well, that's a good question. And that's me validating that that question is good. And it has to do with definition. So I'm gonna take just a second, and we're gonna have a little bit of a deviation. Okay, you said if bolt gets broken, a bolt. What's a bolt? I don't even know if I have one. I was hoping that I had one. A lot of times I have things sitting on my desk. Here, I got a thing. This is a cable cutter. I use it for bicycles, and I use it for guitar strings. All right, so it's a very specific piece of gear. It's got a bolt on it right here where the things hinge together, but that's not the only component of the overall asset. Okay, I got this keeper spring thing in the back. I've got the arms, I've got the spring in the middle, I've got the jaws. Okay. So my point of that is what's a component? This is a component of my toolbox, as is this set of hex wrenches. If you're like, why has he got all these tools on his desk? We'll talk about that later. But both of these go in my bicycle toolbox, but each of them is an individual asset in and of itself, which is made up of different components, such as that bolt that goes through right the middle there, and also the spring that's down here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what I'm getting at is the bolt and the holding mechanism here includes a nut and a lock washer, and then on the other side is a screw. And so right now that the stud that goes through is the smallest or the least reducible component. Like, I can't take it down any further than that, I guess, unless you include design elements like the screwdriver slot that's right here. Okay, so what caused it to fail? Okay, well, let's say that I overstressed it, or I side loaded it to the point where I caused either the threads to fail or the bolt to actually shear or to break. Okay, so the broken bolt would be a failure mode of that particular bolt. See what I mean? That's one mode of existence that bolt could be in that indicates that it's in a failed state. Another failure mode would be stripped threads on that bolt. All right. So I've got a couple of failure modes there, but when you think about it, we can get wrapped up in semantics, because you can say the stripped threads caused the bolt to fail. So is that a failure mode cause, or is that a failure mode in and of itself? And is a failed bolt, is that a failure mode of the overall cable cutters? Yes, it's a cause also of a failure. All right. So my point is that what you call a failure mode or a failure mode cause Depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you go. So you do have to be very careful about defining how deep is it we want to go with this. And because you can imagine a backup generator system for a data center, which is what I was working on last week. I didn't go to the bolts except where it mattered. So if you can hold on to that concept for a minute, Katie, did I explain that in too much detail, or did that make sense? Do you think that that answered the question? Oh, you're on mute, bud.
And I'm just going to add on a question. Is corrective phase equal to predictive used for monitoring?
Sure. I'll get that one in 3 seconds, though. I want to make sure I get the last one because this is a deep topic, right? And I got to be careful because I can over explain.
It sounds like you're saying failure modes and failure mechanisms might be splitting hairs different, but they're basically the same. That's what I heard.
Okay, and yes, sometimes that's true, but depending on what Albert's saying and where he goes with that, I would drill into that. If he and I were talking one-on-one, we would drill into that a little bit further because I will go to different levels depending on what the client wants. Like we can get down to the atomic structure of the material, but you got to know when to stop, and that's going to be one of the points that we make later. So I will so maybe what we can do, Albert, is we can schedule a time to take that offline and we can have a little deeper discussion about that. Because one of the things is that because if you're working for Rockwell or someplace like that where you're talking about things that fly through the air, things that explode, things where the criticality is extreme, you're going to have a different minimum acceptable performance level is going to be different for you than it is for somebody that's operating a set of cable cutters, right? So it kind of depends on operating context. It kind of depends on what the downside is. All of that is how we set the scope and how we set, like with a microscope. Am I looking at it at 10 times, magnification or 100 times magnification? Well, there's a point to be made at each, right? Okay, so let me get to that next question. When I'm in this proactive phase, that's us operating the asset. And what we're doing is we're listening for signals right here at this horizon where we cross from proactive to corrective. All right, that's the minute that the asset starts to degrade in performance. And the earliest that we can detect that is helpful because if we can detect it between here and here, the length of time between here and here is our opportunity to fix it or to take corrective action to bring it back into the green zone. But if we can't, or if we don't recognize it and we cross this horizon from yellow into red, that's the point where its performance, it might still be operating, but it's not operating at the level that we require it to. And then ultimately it leads to complete failure. Okay. So what do you think, Katie? Does that make sense? The graph?
So
Yeah.
far, so good.
Cool. So what you can actually learn quite a lot from this in terms of defining, well, what is my safety margin of performance, right? That indicates the gap between actual and minimum, right? And that can actually feed back into the design phase to say, hey, I need at least 50% safety margin here, okay? Or I can run this real tight, give me 5% and I'll be fine. You have that conversation depending on whatever it is that you're operating. Now, then how do I detect failure? Oftentimes, this assumes that we detect it at the split second that failure begins. Sometimes that's the case, but a lot of times we might not know that it's in a failed state until its performance degrades to the point where you're like, gosh, why can't I get any more RPMs out of this thing? I can't there must be something going on. Well, that's not good, right? So we need to detect it earlier. And then we also need to put things in place to keep or to extend this horizon as far as possible, or barriers that in the event of complete failure, nobody gets hurt or killed as a result, right? So all of this, there's a lot to unpack in a single slide, okay? So keep that in mind. And by the way, I'll write up. I actually owe an ebook on this subject, but I have a write-up that I'll share with you guys after the fact. Okay, we'll post that as a blog entry on our website.
And we have Larry Solberg who says, my mental model, mode is causal, mechanism is design based.
Okay. That's great, Larry. I appreciate that concept, that mental model. And that's I think what the point there is that mental models I think are extremely important for how you visualize the asset and how you visualize failure and success. And each of us sees it differently and in different ways. I have no idea like how my words are registering in Katie or Michelle right now. But I know that if they're going to be successful, that they have to walk into one of these FMEAs with some sort of a mental framework that they can hang everything that they're going to learn onto. And they also need to be able to diagnose and rectify communication differences and gaps between their team members in real time right then and there, because like you've already seen between Larry sees it a little differently than me maybe. Well, is that a problem? Is Larry right? Do I need to adjust my thinking, or do we need to come together on this and reconcile these so that we're operating from the same mental model? And the same with Albert. We need to do some level setting right at the very beginning. And the facility that isn't FMEA. That's more just about facilitation, right? So it's very, very, very important to recognize, diagnose, and fix, almost like doing an FMEA within the FMEA on your communication with your team members as you move along. Does that concept make sense? I don't know. What do you think, Katie? Do you see how that might?
Yeah, communication's important. We got to be on the same page of what we're calling things and the verbs that we use, how we identify things. Agreed.
Well, so after day one of last week, I showed back up in my contact, who is one of the smartest people I've ever met, I have to say. And but she was like, "Hey, I kind of think we need to blow up what we're doing and start from scratch on some of this." But I was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that." I've been through a few of these before, and I saw what I did is I said, well, before we do that, what exactly is the problem that you're seeing, and is there a way that we can not blow up everything that we've done so far, but still address what you see as the issue? And thankfully we were, right? So we found a middle ground, but you have to diagnose and solve those kinds of issues along with the actual problem that you're working on. Right. So what I like about this is what we're trying to do, and I'm gonna what we're looking for out of all of this is what we learn in an FMEA allows us to add what I've added in here, a yellow line called safeguards and barriers. Okay. What that is I've raised the floor above my lower performance threshold. It's like a safety net underneath a bunch of acrobats. All right. If you got the ground and the concrete here, here's my net, okay, above the floor. So FMEA allows us to put these sorts of things in place, and also to develop a process that leads to less deviation. And then in the event of a significant deviation, I hit my safeguard. I don't continue down into my lower performance threshold. So what that does is it helps reduce the risk and the variation that's going to prevent the thing from doing what we need it to do. Does that make sense? So all of this is outcome. And by the way, you need to think about this, I think, as FMEA being a starting point. All right. So these, in fact, last week, so brand new asset, they're going to put these things in place, and they're not in place. They exist in other places, but they're not used in this environment or this context. Okay. So what we're doing is we're getting on the front end of it so we can figure out what might happen and how can we maintain it and operate it in a way that helps us achieve its goals so that it's always available when we need it. We're going to predict failure modes, and we're going to take action on those. And then we're going to run the thing. Well, hopefully nothing bad happens, but sometimes things do. That's going to dictate an RCA. We're going to look at what happened. We're going to use what we determined over here in FMEA as a starting point, because if we predicted ways in which it might fail, and then when we're in an actual failure, we can use this as, well, geez, did it fail in the way that we predicted? It can give us a head start. It can be a troubleshooting guide for helping us diagnose and then know what to do in order to fix it. Okay. But sometimes we've learned new things, and we learned that, hey, it failed in a way that we did not imagine, or that we downplayed during the FMEA. Well, that is going to allow us to feed that learning opportunity back into the FMEA And so it's a cycle of basically it's a PDCA cycle: plan, do, check, act, right? Almost right around the cycle. And so I want you to think about FMEA as a living document. Okay? What do you think, Katie? Is that landing or making sense? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the classic continuous process improvement cycle of, you said it, plan, do, check, act.
Awesome. Okay. So we follow this process. We define the scope, right? And that gets to what are we going to do about how far is this thing going to go? We put our team together. Who do we need on the team? We study. Okay, this is something I'm a big fan. RCA, FMEA, study, 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 learn, 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 learn. I am not a subject matter expert in generators or high supercapacitor UPS systems or sortation systems or jet engines or anything else like that. And even if I was, that's not the role I'm bringing to the party. I'm the facilitator. But I need to study, study, study. And I read everything. And I read more than what they give me. And the more that I learn, the more that I'm prepared. So that allows me to produce what we call the initial asset taxonomy. What that is an outline basically that starts at the high level and it breaks the asset all the way down. Albert was mentioning bolts, okay, and presumably in something expensive and critical. All right. Well, if this is my asset, my cutters here, I need to be able to then break it down into its subsystems and its components, because at the component level is where the failure occurs, not often at the asset level. The impact is felt at the asset level. So I got to define what that is. And then we're going to get together with our team and we're going to go through each line and we're going to talk about it and we're going to, do all the FMEA stuff. And then afterwards, we'll clean up and delivery. That's the reporting phase. Now, I have included hot principles. It's a part of this. Why? Well, because we got a group of people together learning about something. And hot principles are a great way for basically setting the stage so that people are ready to learn. Um, Error is normal. I'm not looking to blame anybody in the past or in the future. Systems or context is important for us when we're writing up what it is that we're going to do. We keep the focus on learning, and we make sure that our response in this whole process is on learning and improving and building resiliency. Okay. So what do you think, Katie? Do you see how we would apply hot principles to the FMEA process, just like in root cause analysis?
100%.
100%, because they work pretty good. The hot principles, by the way, I want to take a dig at them. A lot of people who are proponents of human and organizational performance think that this is a system in and of itself. Well, it's not. All right. It kind of works, but it doesn't. You need to like lay the groundwork for how people work well together, which it's very good at. But then you need to apply that with some form of process so that you don't all end up running around like chickens with your heads cut off. That's my other Southern. Is that a Southern? Is that just universal?
Ah, I think universal.
I think it's also something from a previous generation, because a lot of us aren't harvesting chickens these days. So it might not really make a lot of sense. Anyway, well, let's dig in a little deeper then. I'm going to dig into each of these. So defining the scope. Uh, Apologies for the cheesy sort of drawing, but it actually works pretty good. If you start with the factory in the middle, you can think about the factory. This, by the way, this is a process of taxonomy. So if you think about the animal kingdom, or the plant kingdom or whatever, or the Dewey Decimal System, that's what we're doing here. But let's start at the higher level at the factory. All right, well, what's the factory? Well, let's just say everything inside the fence. But then when we break the factory down, we got our lathe, we got our end mill, we got our sanders, we got our drill press, we got our robot arms. So there's all these different sort of subsystems that make up the factory. There's even these zones that they've broken it down into, which could technically be subsystems in and of themselves. But then as you dig into each one of these pieces of equipment, it can be the asset that we're looking at. And a lot of times that's what we're doing. So we're drawing a boundary around something like a lathe or an end mill or a conveyance or something like that. And so the first thing we got to do is define the scope. So let me, I'm going to jump up to this slide. Now, this speaks to Albert's question and kind of what we were talking about originally. You've got to define the breadth of the FMEA. How far into the factory are we going to go? Sometimes it's actually really easy because the machines themselves literally are physically separated. And sometimes it's a continuous process, so if you're refining gasoline or ethylene or something like that, or if you are you run in a fulfillment center and you're packing up envelopes to ship or boxes to ship, it's actually a continuous process. So it's kind of hard to know where does one start and where does one stop. But we define it, because if we don't, then it's too easy to get out of scope. Right. Oh, electrical as well. So let's say that you're running a substation, so the power comes in and then, it's constantly running through transformers and switches, circuit breakers, and, all of that sort of thing. So, well, the electricity itself is continuous, but so we have to define where we're focusing so that we know where the boundary is. Okay. The depth. This speaks directly to Albert's question. Are we going to the nuts and bolts level, or are we going to hold up at the, more of a subsystem level? That totally depends on what you want out of the FMEA. If you're looking to, and here's an example. So 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, I was in Texas working on a supercapacitor uninterruptible power supply system. And all this thing does is, it's very fancy and it sounds very fancy, but all it does is, because normal electricity coming in from the utility, it kind of does this, right? It sort of varies, and sometimes it dips down and comes back up. Well, most of our stuff can handle it. The fan in the bathroom's doesn't care about things like that. But other kinds of equipment like variable frequency drives and other things that are very sensitive to voltage fluctuations. Oh, I learned that like a fan motor itself last week can be extremely sensitive to voltage fluctuations, because if the voltage sags out for a second, the fan continues to spin, but now it turns it's not consuming power, but it's actually generating power because of its momentum. But then if the voltage comes on again, it can actually really do some jolting damage to the fan itself. So what this uninterruptible power supply system does is it bridges those gaps. All right. Well, so guess what a supercapacitor is? Katie, do you know what a supercapacitor is?
It's a bigger, better capacitor.
Bigger and better. And that's basically it. And that's a good way to put it. And being able actually to make a very specific engineering language into words that 8-year-olds, maybe not 6-year-olds, but 10-year-olds can understand is extremely important, because you need to be able to explain it in real terms, because often the people that are making decisions about equipment are not the subject matter experts, and being able to translate between an electrical engineer and a business manager sometimes is like, gosh, it's really, really important. So yeah, it's a bigger, better capacitor. It holds more juice, basically, a lot more energy density, so that it'll basically operate for longer. A normal capacitor might operate for a few milliseconds, or like a few hundred milliseconds, very short period of time. Supercapacitor might operate for up to 3 seconds, which still, you're like, gosh, is that long enough? Yeah, because most voltage sags last they're a lot shorter than that, right? Okay, well, what do you think I do, Katie, when let's say that I have what's a good example here? So what do I do when I have a power supply and the overall supercapacitor UPS system go bad? Like, it's just
Get a new one.
yeah. Here, check it out. Here's an example. All right. Here's a power supply for my computer. If this goes bad, I get a new one. In fact, I have another one sitting on the floor, so I have it in spare. What I don't do is tear into it and start metering and looking for all the different ways in which it fails. So we're going to go down often to that level of maintainability. And a lot of times, Katie, you probably have a term for this, but it's, yank and replace. It's like, okay, that looks like that's a $10,000 piece of electronic gear, but once the magic blue smoke comes out of it, I don't care what it is. It's no good to me. So I'm going to just yank it out, throw it in the trash, and put a new one in. Now, I'm often not digging into it and figure out, well, how did the smoke get out of it? That's more, that's a level of detail too far for most FMEAs because it's simply not practical. If I'm the one that manufactures a power supply and I'm getting a bunch of warranties in, and I'm like, holy cow, I've got, 500 warranty claims on our latest release. You bet I'm going to dig into it because then we're going to need to figure it out because that's root cause analysis at that point. But you can see how your scope and how much you care about it changes based upon who you happen to be, right? So that's one of the things is always make sure that, in Albert's case, he's talking about tensile strength of bolts. It's like, well, what are those bolts holding? And all bolts have tensile strength. All bolts have a shear, they have the brittle failure versus ductile failure that you're referencing. But I have to ask myself if I care, because I don't always. And sometimes I do.
So would you be asking yourself about risk? And so if this thing fails, how bad is it going to be for the system, the company, a person? And then based on that risk, that'll tell you how far down you need to go. Like if
Yeah.
it failed and it's no big deal, then we maybe don't address it right now. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
That's right. And we will actually assign risk scores and a future step. So we will detailed dig into what the risk actually is. Okay. But hold that thought for a sec. Okay. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk about establishing the team. And I swipe this just from RCA. This is right from our RCA class. You build a FMEA team just like you do an RCA team. I'm looking for diversity. I'm looking for good, positive players. I also know that only 3 or 4 people are going to contribute probably 85, 90% of the information, So yes, there's other 30 people that have to be in the room because sometimes the group can get very big. And sometimes you never hear a word out of some of those participants. Okay, well, sit there if you want, but you should know that most of the information is going to come from a few participants. So you want to identify those critical participants. And you very well may look in maintenance, operations, safety, original equipment manufacturer, third-party experts, control technicians, honestly, whatever. Get on the team, get the people on the team that you need so that when you're in your meetings, when you ask a question, the question gets answered. All right. Now, I mentioned study. You got to study, you got to read, you got to dig. Boundary diagram. I don't have an example that I can share. I have a ton of examples. I just don't have one but if you Google boundary diagram, you see what I mean. It's basically just like a PowerPoint slide or a Visio slide that has all the things and how they relate to one another. And sometimes they're fancy in that they show how, like, exactly what is the relationship. Do they have a one-way electrical relationship? Does fluid transfer between them? Does energy transfer between them? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we could probably spend an hour on boundary diagrams, but the boundary diagram is helpful because it shows you those interactions. I like a bill of materials. Bill of materials is everything in the asset. Now, I like having everything because then I can dial it back from there, right? But the problem with bill of materials sometimes that it can be actually pretty, it can be, well, it can be a little overwhelming. That said, I want it because I want to see what's there. And then oftentimes it's very helpful in making sure that I'm mirroring the terms on the bill of materials as in the FMEA. I don't make up my own terms for things. I default to what's in the manuals, in the BOM, in the training decks, so that we're not calling in one sense. We're like, yeah, no, we call that this over here, but it's really the same as that over there. I don't, that makes it confusing for me. So I try to use manufacturer derived terms for and titles for these things. I look at training decks. I look at OEM videos. I look at schematics. I'm not very good at reading wiring diagrams. Okay, I'll just admit it. I'm pretty damn good these days at reading engineering diagrams. Okay, so I've gotten better at that, and engineering drawings, line drawings, things like that. So you know, I'm doing my best. And here's one thing I think that's really important. I studied finance in college. I didn't study engineering, but I'm presented with an engineering drawing. So what? Dig in, look at it, figure it out. It says something. It's there for a reason. And if you're like a lot of people, I think, throw their hands up and they're like, "Yeah, I just don't get that." Well, get it. Don't give up. Keep trying, because for me, we're in it to win, right? Like we're charging money for this stuff. So like that's just simply not going to fly. I don't understand it. Figure it out, okay? And trust in your ability there. Is somebody
We have a timely question relating to AI. So understanding the limitations of AI, how do you see it being helpful as a tool in FMEA?
okay, so I kind of feel I feel a little guilty because I've been using it a lot. And I love it and it's great, but it'll lie to you too. So you have to be very careful. So just like with root cause analysis, it will tell you with confidence what the failure modes are of a bolt. And if you're more specific about the type of bolt that it is, what its intended purpose is, what the materials are, all of that sort of thing, then it will be more specific as well. And it can absolutely be very, very useful. It can be a little overboard, and it can be extremely useful, oh my God, in background and in figuring out. Like last week, for instance, I don't listen. So I'll admit that the way electricity is generated, the conversion of mechanical energy to electrical energy, that process is something that I've always found challenging to explain and to rationalize. I spent an hour and a half, me and ChatGPT last week, and I was like, you're gonna have to, I'm done with not knowing how this works. Let's dig in. Boy, was it helpful. It was so helpful for me. And I used that directly in the FMEA the very next morning. So AI is exactly as useful in FMEA as it is everywhere else. It consumes a ton of data, it identifies patterns, it provides you with explanations and answers, and it does it confidently, and it can be wrong. So use at your own risk and be very careful. Okay.
And we have a follow-up question to your current slide, which is you included a bullet point about past failure reports. How is this used in the FMEA process?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, because you want to know how it's failed before, so maybe like last week, for instance, they're putting these generators in a situation where it's novel for the client. They haven't ever used this type before, and now they're making an investment in these new gens. Well, these generators exist they've sold thousands of these before. So we are asking, well, how has it failed in the past at your other clients? Now, you got to be very careful because this operating context is totally different, and you need to keep that sort of variable in mind. But it's still useful to ask. Have you ever seen corrosion build up in contacts? Have you ever seen, and if they're like, you know what, not really. We haven't seen even in a salt air environment, a seaside environment, we're not really seeing a lot of corrosion build up in the failure database. Okay, so by studying how it's failed in the past, it can inform the types of failure modes that you consider for your FMEA.
And because I promised everyone to keep track of time, you have 15 minutes, Brian.
I'm staring right at it. It's like it's right here. Brian, go faster. All right. So we produced the initial taxonomy. That's step number 4. And it's an outline. It's pretty simple. So you remember we start with the asset, okay, and then subsystem. And by the way, this kind of speaks also to that conversation I had earlier. We generally are going to go 3 levels deep and sometimes 4 levels deep. So asset, subsystem, component. Why? Because for the most part, that gets us what we need and without overly complicating it. Really, there's no such thing as a component. And in defining these, what's probably a little more useful but a little more difficult to define is asset, subsystem one, level one, subsystem level 1.1, subsystem level 1.1.1, all the way down. Okay. But because people often talk about component, we decided not to get away from that. I'm not going to fight that convention. The brand of component is very strong. And so component is generally the baseline, the base level that we get to. And then from component, we look at how many ways in which that component could fail. Failure mode one, failure mode two, failure mode three. And what we do this all here, I'll give you an example. My asset is I'm going to use mountain bike. I like to bike, hence my tools. All right, so I've got my mountain bike. That's my asset. Okay, but the subsystem I'm going to go down to is the wheels. Okay, so the wheels. Well, they don't turn like that unless I'm going upside down. But okay, wheels. I've got rear wheel hub bearings. Now that I've taken it down to there, that's my component level. All right, well, I could have a lubrication failure through contamination, right? So I could get dirt and grime and water in my bearings. I could have lubrication failure because I used wrong grease. I was in a race one time years ago now with a guy, and he took all of his bearing grease out because he was like, it makes it too hard to turn, and he replaced it all with really thin, literally like tri-flow. But he only cared about getting through the race. He didn't care if he blew his bearings out. He just needed it to last long enough. And so yeah, it spun freely, but he had a different, but that's not me. Old or degraded grease. So these are all different grease-related failure modes. The bearings could also be worn or damaged, and also I could have the incorrect preload. I could either have them too tight or too loose. Now I would then go on to define what would cause contamination. All right. So this is the difference between what I would call a failure mode and then a cause of that failure mode. And there might be multiple causes. So you can see that this might get fairly complicated pretty quickly. And then but this is my initial asset taxonomy. Okay. And I try to get this done before I ever show up to my first meeting. So I've got to learn enough about what I'm dealing with that I can produce this outline and show up with something, so that I'm showing up. And then as I get into these meetings, maybe they're virtual, maybe they're in person. Honestly, I would way rather do these in person, but it's a pain in the ass. It's a lot more productive, but it's costly. You got to bring everybody in and, all of that. Okay, but it's better. In fact, it's so much better when you can put your hands on the equipment that I can't even describe. It's orders of magnitude more productive when you can see the stuff operating, when you can touch the stuff on the spare shelf, all of that sort of thing. But virtual is fine for some of this too. Like we'll often do a few rounds of virtual sessions, do an in-person session, and maybe close out with a virtual session. So I'd say the blend is the most practical and the balance. If I had my way, I would do it all in person, but you do what you can. Okay. So round one, we go through the asset taxonomy. We discuss the functions, the failure modes, the causes. I encourage people to share what they know. This is the learning phase. All right. And by the way, this is me. I will not put process in front of learning. I said this at the very beginning. So I do this all in Excel. I'll show you a version of that in a minute. But and we have a version in CosLink too. Although it's good for storing the output of FMEAs. There's a reason why Excel might still make sense as a facilitation tool. But what I'm doing at this point, y'all, is typing. I'm learning and typing and learning and typing and learning and typing. And if you can have somebody else there to help document, that might be really great. But I'm the primary student. Teach me about this supercapacitor. What does it look like? Where's the input? Where's the output? How does it get charged? How does it discharge? When it blows up, does it kill everybody in the room? Does it leak stuff out? Do we need to trap that? I'm learning, typing, learning, typing. I'm going to facilitate a guided conversation about that component and its failure modes. And then I'm going to take the burden on myself to document all that was said, and then I'm going to organize that stuff later. Okay. So I'm the primary student. So Katie, can you imagine yourself in front of a bunch of people with the supercapacitor UPS system, basically saying, okay, we're going to focus only on the capacitor itself. Here's a picture of it. Here's what we said that it does. You guys said that it could fail in these ways. Let's have a discussion about that.
Absolutely.
Because then, and then and you can't be afraid of what you don't understand. If you don't understand it as a facilitator, you have to say to them, you have to make them explain it in a way that you understand. And you have to go into hyper learning mode to really understand it. You can't superficially be like, oh, this is just an interesting conversation. No, 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 no. You've got to turn your own super learning engine on in that moment and learn as much as you possibly can and take the notes that you need to take such that when you get back to it later, you can reproduce what needs to be done in the actual document.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is to look for patterns. And
Yep.
so just taking a bolt, for example, like we were talking about earlier, or a screw, I mean, at least I understand the basic functionality of a bolt. So it doesn't matter if that bolt's in a supercapacitor or part of your bike or a part of my boat engine. You know, you look for those patterns and you glob on to what you already know, and then you start building on it. So that helps.
It's so helpful to use your own personal experience, like bike maintenance. Bike maintenance is what I really know. And I'm pretty good. Like I could work as a mechanic in the shop. I'm pretty darn good at that. But how does that translate to what a diesel generator does? Well, there's a
Right.
lot. You know, there's torque values, there's material differences and interfaces, there's grease, there's bearings, there's
That's right.
pivot points, there's shock absorbers, there's all kinds of things that it translates to. So exactly. So that's round one. We get that part figured out. And then what we do is we dig deeper. We'll actually score the risk. And I'll show you that in a second. Michelle, I see the time, so it is a deep subject, but I'll get to this point here pretty quick. I want to be very careful of the desire to copy and paste. I don't want to get lazy. That means that I might have a bearing in I've got a bearing in my wheel, but I also have a bearing in my bottom bracket and I have a bearing in my headset. Those are different. They're all bearings, but they are different. And I can't just copy and paste bearing, all the way across just in the effort of getting it done, right? But we go through and we do the scoring, and then we figure out what we're going to do, and then we think outside the score, like, okay, here's what the score told us, but let's remember that scoring itself can be relatively subjective. It's helpful, but it's still subjective. Do I believe the scores, right? A little bit of professional skepticism. And then we clean it up and deliver it, and that's the last step. And so what we usually deliver is the detailed FMEA file in Excel, okay? Prioritized list of failure modes by criticality, actions that are either complete or with a designated owner. So what are we doing next? A list of spares. And then also we can deliver sometimes what we do. Well, I've been doing this every time, but a PowerPoint with the asset information, photos, documentation, um, PM schedules, preventative and predictive maintenance schedules, things like that. Identifying design changes. If there's coding involved, like for Amazon, we're always on the hook to deliver all the codes, and we're actually pretty good at coding these based on their coding hierarchy. Troubleshooting guides and whatever else, so there's a lot. What I've learned is that, like with RCA, yeah, you're learning and you're coming up with the output and all of that sort of thing. With FMEA, most of the value happens after the FMEA, the derivative value that comes from what you learned and how you documented it. So this is a gift that keeps on giving. Okay. So what do you think, Katie? Those are like the 6 steps and of the process. And then I'm going to show you, I do have enough time to kind of walk you through a quick example, but we define the scope, we put our team together, we study, study, study. We produce that initial asset hierarchy or taxonomy. We go through our meetings and then we clean everything up and deliver it.
Agreed.
You're ready to go. Okay, you're on the next one.
Put me in, coach.
Okay. Well, let's do this then. I'm going to just very quickly, why not a mountain bike, right? This actually, you can tell there's no real, there's no real question about where it starts and where it stops, but the asset is all of this. But then let's break it down a little bit. So we get into some drawings. Here's just the frame. And, you can see this rear, this is called the chain stay. This is called the seat stay. This is the bottom, or I'm sorry, this is the derailleur hanger. This is the rear pivot. Here's I'm not sure exactly what this is called, different things, but this is the rocker pivot. You've got your bottom bracket here, and then you've got what's called your front triangle. All of that is the same unit. Okay, rear triangle consists of these primary components. You've got your shock absorber, right? So you can see how we would break this down. And then I've got some real pictures. This is really my bike. Okay. And pictures is super helpful in labels because look, I mean, there's a drawing. Okay. Like here's this rocker arm right here. Well, here it is in real life. And here it is covered with dirt and crap too. You can see I need to clean it up a little bit, right? But you've got these, you can see these, you can see the bolt types, so pictures are super helpful. And imagine that you were working with somebody from Norco who designed the bike, somebody from a bike shop who's worked on the bikes, some riders that have ridden the bikes who know what they behave like in real time, right? So as we dig through all of this, here's a bottom bracket bearing, and it's all pulled apart. You need to be able to understand, what's the nature of this bearing? How is it held in place? How is this? You can see there's got a seal on it and all of that sort of thing. Pictures are super helpful in determining what's what. And then I'm gonna do this because I have and then I'm gonna end this thing right on time, Michelle. So believe it or not, when we're building an asset hierarchy, typically I'm going to start with a cell, and I have asset subsystem component, right? So here's mountain bike frame set. Here's the top tube, right? Here's the down tube. Here's the seat tube. Here's the seat stay. Here's the chain stay, and here's the fork and the shock, and so as I break it all down, and then we define the function of the top tube, we define failure mode. In this case, here's a
Hey,
bent.
Brian.
Yep.
We have a question I can't answer with certainty. We use RPM numbers, right? And can you show
Right
that?
here, I'm getting to it
Perfect.
right now. Yeah. So look, if this top tube is bent, that will cause the bike to be off balance. It'll cause it not to drive straight, and could potentially compromise safety. The severity of that, I've listed that as a 9. And severity is something that is, we can determine severity. Well, we need to define what our scale is, and that's out of scope for our subject matter or today, right? But so I define the severity, okay? I also will define the level of occurrence, which is the probability of occurrence. And then also the level of detectability. How likely am I going to be to detect that particular failure mode? And then RPN, risk priority number, is the severity, 9 times 2, which is occurrence. So now I'm at 18 times 3, which gives me a risk score of 54. Okay, and I do that for every failure mode. Now you can see how this process could get a little bit cumbersome, and you might be subject to copy and paste, but by the time I get done, I've got an entire reliability study of all the ways in which this particular bike might fail. And also because I've got my RPN numbers, if I sort highest to lowest in a Pareto style, I can also see what are my highest priority failure modes for this asset. And then I can take action. And then I can determine spares and whatnot.
And with that, we're exactly on time. Good job, Brian.
See,
Um,
well,
yeah, I'll do a quick wrap up. I understand this is a deep topic and 60 minutes was a little bit short. I'll follow up in 1 or 2 days once our video is up and share the video review link with everyone. In the meantime, please feel free to follow up with us if you would like to schedule a one-on-one call just to discuss our FMEA consultation or FMEA help in more details.
Yeah. And so that's helpful. And then we can end the formal webinar at this point, but I'll stay on. Okay. So I know some of you have to go and all that, but I can hang out for a few more minutes because Katie and I have a call right now anyway. We're going to talk about this exact subject. So you can stay or go. Katie, do you want to just move on into our meeting and we can talk about FMEA a little bit? We can't share secrets, right? But you know, like from an overview standpoint. So let's just see if anybody has any questions. And those of you that have to leave, go ahead and leave. It's no problem. Totally get it, you know. But like Michelle said, reach out if you want to have a deeper dive on this, and then look out for our follow-ups. Michelle, you can go too if you don't, or you can hang out, whatever. Okay. Let's see. Do we have any more questions, Katie? Let me see. I Q&A.
No, I was fielding answers as we went along.
Yeah. So I see that Yusuf, if Yusuf is still on, corrective phase equals predictive. That's not exactly true. I would say predictive, Yusuf, is when you predict that a failure is about to occur, and then you take action prior to that while you're still in the green zone, but almost to the yellow. You know, so you're basically like, I'm getting right up to the line. So. Brian, this was used in Taproot. Albert says, okay. I'm not sure, Albert, because I don't know how Taproot does failure modes effects analysis. But if they used my bike example, then that's fine. I don't know. But talk to me we can talk about that later. Julie Ahmed, Julie, if you're still on, I'm gonna, I don't know, did we answer? Did you type? Do you have to pay extra for the FMEA module? Yes, we charge extra for it. And but Julie, you know, you can call me anytime and I'll talk with you about that. And Tweedley Perez. Oh, God, I probably butchered your name and I apologize for that. So is it useful for software failures? Yes, but it would be a novel approach. And what we would want to do, God, what I would do is put you in touch with our software dev team, and we could definitely talk about how you would apply that. But basically, anything you can break down in a taxonomy, you would be able to apply this same process. Might be a little different, right? Okay. All right. So Katie, in real life, okay, you tell me, based on what we just went through, how did that land for you? Did it like, I don't know, from a high level standpoint, like what do you know about this now, and like how would you apply it? Let's maybe take something simple. We'll take a simple example. Like let's say that I hired you to come in and help me with my mountain bike and call me a subject matter expert. And I'm like, you know what I want, Katie? I got a brand new mountain bike. And but I want to do right by it. I want it to last as long as I can make it last. I haven't had it out on the trails yet at all. It has not been used. It's just built out of the box. But I want to do a FMEA study on it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let me do this. So the first thing that we have to do, I'm gonna just pull this up. So define the scope. So like if you were helping me define the scope, how would you do that? Like what sorts of questions would you, and these are questions for you, you know, your questions. I know what I would ask, but how would you ask those questions? You know, like your first step is to define the scope of the FMEA.
I think for me, in this particular example, I have a mountain bike, so I'm slightly familiar with them, but I may have to do a little studying up right now, actually, before I get further along. You said don't let the process hinder the process. So I may actually have to do some quick studying up and take a peek at that owner's manual, look at an exploding diagram just to see how small the components get, and ask to define the scope. Yeah, I might need to take a look at that manual first.
Yeah, and then also you can ask me. Okay, Brian, so what do you want to get out of this? Usually that's step number one. What do you want to get out of this? And I'm like, well, you know what, Katie, when I hit the trail, I don't want to find out that my chain's dry or I pop a link as I'm going up. I break a chain link
Sure.
as I'm applying pressure,
You don't want to walk out of the woods.
Oh, nobody wants to do that. And I don't want to, so I don't want to walk out of the woods. I also don't want to get hurt or killed, but I'm primarily worried about some kind of failure happening on the trail. And so that gives you an idea of what I want. Okay, so look, there's more questions coming in. So there's the open question. Shelley's asking, how would I scope a quality failure? Okay,
Mm.
how would you scope a quality failure, Katie? And then let's hear let's see. Like, let's say that Shelly comes and I don't know where Shelly works, right? But let's say that she works for Norco, and she's like, Shelly, or she's like, Katie, I want to minimize the re quality defects on this particular line of mountain bikes, and we've never used FMEA for quality defects, anticipating quality defects before. How might we do that?
I guess based on what you just told me, we'd say, well, Shelley, what would you like to get out of this?
Right. And so I bet she's going to say, well, I want to deliver, I want to minimize the number of returns for warranty on this particular bike.
Mhm.
And or minimize the amount of like so maybe there are certain quality defect failures that owners are like, that shouldn't have happened, but it did, but I don't care. I'm just going to fix it and go on with my life. So she might not, some quality defects she might not ever hear about. You know what I mean?
Right. Does
So
it impact the functionality of the bike or is it just cosmetic?
well, quality defect kit, it depends. Some I'm gonna
Well,
take it.
that's my question back to Shelley or the person, what we got to scope it. So
Okay.
are we talking about functionality or are we talking about non-functionality? We'll just put those into two broad categories because if we're defining the scope when it only comes to functionality, okay, that's one thing. But again, a little scratch in the paint, well, we're going to
Yeah.
let that
But
go. So
what
that would be a good starting point for defining the scope.
That's right, exactly. But asking those questions and letting I would help guide Shelley to help define what the scope is. And then before I jump in, but I've got some. I mean, around bikes, some paint is bomber and lasts forever. Some paint's so soft, it's like, gosh, this paint just scratched up basically the second I took it out of the box. Well, that's something that she might care about. It's not doesn't impact the functionality of the bike in any way, but it impacts my perception of the bike. And when I just dropped $7,000 on a freaking thing with two wheels, I probably could have bought a used car for less. I mean, it's like I might care about it a little bit. So
Maybe.
define the scope in that way. So whatever it is that they produce, I would say, and then also there's a cause pattern around quality failures. I would ask Shelley, are you talking about a failure of in production, basically? So something that fails along the way. And are we also talking about a failure of the quality management system to identify that defect that was at the point of introduction versus further down the line? So, it may very well, a quality assurance FMEA is a lot like a process failure. Well, it's kind of like process as well as product because you've got to say what might that failure be, but with the caveat that manufacturing is going to introduce it, okay, or a supplier, but manufacturing is going to introduce the failure. So that's going to be a special caveat. You're upstream from where we normally are in the FMEA process itself. But so now, how might manufacturing introduce a failure? What might cause that? At the same time, actually around the detection level, right? So this is where we could actually bring that detection score. How
Mhm.
might we detect it? And importantly, how might we fail to detect it? So that's going to be a little bit of a twist. And so that's probably how I would scope that, Shelley. And then I would start with that, but most of that's going to be a discussion between us. And then I'm going to do a mock-up of this, like we'd maybe do a couple of lines and say, here's what the output of this would be. Does that fit your goals and objectives? And then we're going to run with it. We might do a check-in here and there, knowing that we're using it in a novel approach. Do a check-in along the way. Are we getting what we want? Are we getting what we need? Right? Yeah. Okie dokie. Okay, so then all right, so scope. Okay, after that, establishing the team. For our mountain bike example, Katie, who do you think, remembering what I said, that usually there's 3 or 4 people that provide 85, 90% of all the information. Who might we want on a team for the mountain bike?
Well, in an ideal world, it would be myself, the facilitator, you, and then maybe a manufacturing tech, somebody from the OEM,
That'd be
like
cool.
a tech type person that could provide the technical expertise. Because although you said you're awesome at bikes, you're not the OEM tech. So,
I've learned a ton, especially there's some from a lot of people in the bike business. When I have a question, they are good. Like I call them up, and the customer service people, they know the gear inside and out, and they'll be like, "Okay, look for this little screw, do this. Oh, here's a trick for getting that to seat correctly, or here's what you need to do, or you know what you bought. Sometimes even, you bought our product." But it's not the best for that application. And I've been offered refunds before based upon because they don't want me to think badly about the company, right?
sure.
I've been offered brand new, brand new crank set before. They're like, should not have failed in that way, but send back the broken one. I want to look at that one personally. I want to understand exactly why that failed. But in the meantime, I got a brand new one coming to you. You know what I mean? So like, so you get that you can get the tech people, and even if they can't be in the room with you, maybe they're on call, right?
Sure.
Okay, so then study, study, study. So now this is pretty much you all on your own, so it's like the web, the chat GPT, OEM documentation, under the hood documentation that might not be publicly available, right? All of anything and everything. Like, let me see what I can't share. I need to, okay. Oh, that's you. Katie, you need to eat lunch. You need to go. Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. We're gonna wrap it here pretty quick. Study, 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 learn, learn, learn. And then when we produce the asset hierarchy or the taxonomy, basically just start with bike and then break it down into the subsystem, frame set, wheels, drivetrain, components. And a lot of times, guess what? The OEM documentation often has already broken it out. That's the thing. Well, use theirs. Like start with use theirs. Why not match their documentation? There's no sense reinventing the wheel. And then break it down from there. The documentation often tells you exactly what the component level is. Now, here's where I'll get into Chat GPT. Let's see what I have pulled up here. I'm going to go here. I'm going to say, hey there, do you want to help me identify the failure modes for the top tube of an all, oh no, this is more of we'll just say mountain bike. This is a Norco optic C2. Boom. So it actually gives me some pretty good info. Cracking at welds or joints, buckling under compressive load. And it gives me the cause and location, material fatigue, micro cracks, impact damage, delamination if it's carbon. It's not carbon. Oh no, it is carbon. Duh. Okay, I don't even know my own bike. It is carbon. Here, let's look at what it said. So now, was that helpful? Yeah, thanks, bud. But then I also want to make sure that that it's credible, right? So I'm going to take it with a grain of salt. Top tube right here. It's made from carbon fiber, and it's talking about the welds or the interfaces. It's talking about degradation. It's talking about if I impact it. And so I do my own assessment as to whether I think that those are credible failure modes. I put them here I'll put them here. Or I'll also, I can ask it because I'm at primary function. It's good at defining. Can you define primary function and functional Failure.
Brian, I need to run to give myself a little bit of time between calls, but
We'll
thank you
catch
very
up
much.
on it later. This is so here we'll just I do this and it works. Okay, we'll catch you later. I'll catch you all later. Is anybody still on? Oh goodness. No, there's a few of you. All right. Well, look, I hope this makes sense. Thanks for hanging. I appreciate it. Here, let me just make sure that you have my contact info. You guys can get in touch with me later. And thanks for letting me run way over. I'm happy that you were able to spend a little extra time with me. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, right there. Here. Get in touch, stay in touch. Oh, I emailed all of you already. So, but Brian Hughes at sologic.com, and I think we'll just call it a day. All right. I'll post this right here though for you so you can get in touch. I love FMEA. If you can't tell, I think it's super fun. It's really fun to learn about all this stuff. So, okay. We'll call it a day, and I hope you all have a great Wednesday. Thanks for spending time with me. I'll talk to you later.